I think connectively, it was from, since my background is in law, but also my background before I was in law, I was um, a playwright. And that's how I see myself. And so I wanted to write a book that would interest people so that they, as regular people, as well as historians and others who would take it to another level, but as regular people, they can see their power. And so I started thinking about what time frame would people be able to relate to. So I looked at different topic areas that would relate to people in their lives. And so I thought about, well, they know Martin Luther King, so let me focus on the civil rights movement. So I started looking at the civil rights movement and the type of protests that took place there that involved regular people. For example, the Memphis sanitation strike. Regular sanitation workers who wanted to have a better life, better pay, decided to go on strike. And then I said, okay, people need to know that having a strike is a form of protest. So once they started to see it, I was hoping they would see in their own lives how they or members of their families along the line have participated in protest, so that they would be more engaged and understand that protest is happening all around us, that we have benefited from protest, and that protest is not something that is foreign, and it's not something that is just in the streets, that there are diverse ways in which people have protested. And so whether or not it's forming a union, which is an act of protest, saying that I want to have better working conditions, more money, I'm not going to fall for the status quo anymore, I'm pushing back, I want to speak at the table with you, and having that voice. Then I started thinking about women and women, and the rights that women have. And we think about women and gaining the right to vote in 1920, but it took decades of protest before they gained the right to vote. So I wanted people to understand that protest is not something you do on Friday and there's automatic change on Monday, that there's an investment in it. It's not just one protest, it's a protest over time. And the personal, so I added memoir, which was very difficult for me because, as most academics and other people, and just me personally, because I do public things, but I'm a private person. And so to actually say, well, this part of my life, like with my mom and my great great grandmother, who was enslaved. I mean, these stories that people would actually say, I had an aunt who decided to take a job as a woman, and it was, a job that most women didn't have at that time. Or I had a father who was in a union, and because of that, I got a scholarship to college, and now we're in the middle class. I mean, I wanted people to relate to the different stories in the book. So even though it's over 500 years, I didn't want it to be a story of history. As David McCullough has said, some people drain all the life out of history. I wanted history to be alive, and so I brought it all the way up to the 21st century. So it's a history book, but it's also a history book of stories. I'd like to look at the Indigenous as the original protesters, and to put it in a framework that people understand. You invite somebody, or somebody arrives at your front door in distress, and you offer them comfort, maybe something to eat, give them a place to rest for a while, and they don't want to leave. So then what do? These people don't want to leave. And basically that's what happened. The Europeans, in English, for example, arrived in 1607. And that's where we start our country's history. We don't start our country's history with the Pilgrims, even though this is a time period in which people think that, but that's not true. The English decided that there would be a corporation. So businessmen decided to have a colony and help finance a colony, get a charter from King James to start this colony. Other monarchs have started colonies too in the New World. And so they are sending ships over that they're financing to start this colony. And so when Chief Powhatan now sees these people, he thinks they're just here, they're in distress, they're going to leave. And they begin to hunt up all the animals on the hunting ground. They start treating the Native Americans poorly, and he wants them to go. Some of the first protests would be the same type of protests we have today: selective buying or withholding resources. So they said, we're not going to let you hunt on our hunting ground anymore. We're not going to give you the resources we were giving you before. We're going to cut some of these things out. And protests against how you are treating us and the fact that you won't leave. You also have negotiation. You have people who decide we're going to send negotiators in to tell you our side of the story, what we want, what we don't want. These are some of the things they did back then. And I think that is very important that we understand that survival of the culture of the indigenous people is a protest against forced assimilation. That we're not going to take on your religion wholeheartedly. We're not going to get rid of our beliefs. And it takes a lot for people to withstand that over 500 years. And so they were able to do that, to protest against this forced assimilation into a European mindset that they didn't want to have. What I've discovered was protests are usually violent. That's why the nonviolent response to violence was so unique through Martin Luther King's philosophy. So this idea that people have to use some form of pushback, and it could be disruption that could be violent or disruption that had in some way to capture the view of the status quo, the power brokers to say, listen to what we're saying, we want change and we want it now. And so when we think about the civil rights movement was not just about nonviolence. That was something that Martin Luther King, Bayard Rustin from Mahatma Gandhi decided to incorporate, and it was a philosophy. It was not something inbred into Black people. It was not in our DNA to be nonviolent. And there were many Black people who were murdered who were not even protesters, but because people felt they could. And they basically got away with murder because the prosecutors didn't prosecute, and the courts didn't stand up for them, and the politicians didn't stand up for them. And so the idea was to take the violence that was evident by certain groups and show the world the soul of this nation. And in doing that, persuade people outside. And that's what a lot of folks forget about protests. It's the message. And if you use violence and the violence becomes the focal point, then the message is lost. And so in order to get that message across, some people will say, we're so desperate that we want you to hear us that we'll use violence to get your attention. What Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement did, some people within the Civil Rights Movement said, we are going to let you see yourselves. We're going to let you see the worst part of the American racist system. And then in seeing yourself in these people, you will then want to change your behavior. You're going to want to change your laws. You're going to want to be on our side because you can obviously see you're on the wrong side of history. And so violence can be used in that constructive way. But what I always like to say is nonviolence in protest is not nonviolence. It means the people who are the subject of violence are responding nonviolently. Violence is still a component, and it's usually through law enforcement or through people in the general public who believe that they can get away with acting violently against a protester. Protesting has always been subject to violence because the idea, how dare you think that the society we have is not good enough for you? You malcontent, you communist, you anti-patriotic, you should leave. You shouldn't even have the right to have a voice here. So despite all of the laws and the protections that are supposed to be there, this idea is that your very protest is seen as violence to some people because it's such an insult that they feel like protesting against the war, even peacefully, people were attacked because it just made them so angry that you would actually protest against the war. So when we're defining violence, some people say, well, they started it by actually saying these things. Some of the civil rights protesters would sing, God Bless America. That would make people outraged. How dare you sing God Bless America? How dare you sing Black and White Together? They felt those were fighting words. And so therefore they had a right to use violence. But violence has mostly been from the side of the status quo, people protecting or standing up for the status quo against somebody questioning it and saying that they want a different lifestyle. I went to West Virginia to learn more about the coal miners' strike. Once again, Forming a union is a form of protest. It's saying I'm not going to just be handed the wages, the job conditions that you're giving me. I think that one-on-one, once again, our power is not as great as an individual. But if we unify, our power is greater. Then you start to look at how can you get the message out. Tennessee Ernie Ford. And I remember like this, like I, owe my soul to the company store. And that's telling the story right there in that song of what that coal miner is going through. That, all that work and loading the coal, and this is what I get, and I don't have money, I don't own anything. And when I was there and saw that they were paid in scripts, that it's a piece of paper, it's not even like US currency. They're paid in a piece of paper that they can only use at the company store. So they would go in and always, at the end of the day, end up owing more than they were paid. And so the house belonged to the company, the land. So even if they decided the cost that they would pay to want to union and to unionize, and so they would have a collective voice in order to have more money, to have more protections on the job. And you start to hear the songs and going into the folk music. And the folk music was talking about the laborers, the folk music around getting the 8-hour workday, the folk music around the different wars. I mean, that was something that was very important. And then, the sense that people could hear in the song wherever they were. And this is quite important as well. The messaging on the signs and the protests, the messaging in the pamphlets being handed out, the messaging in the song, the messaging has to reach beyond the protest itself. It's got to go to the people in the outer realm so that they can say, what is this? I want to question it. Why are they putting themselves at risk like this? What is it that they want? And then that value system has to click in. Is what's going on in the status quo really within my value system? And what's the reason why they can't have what they want? What is it that they're saying? Because it just wasn't done like that before, so it can't be done like that now. So those people have to have time in their own homes, their jobs, in the car, going back and forth, their own living rooms, to think about what people are protesting over. And songs go in there, they seep into those places that the person can't reach, or that 2 seconds on the media can't deliver. And so that's why music is so important. And that's the emotion. I spent a lot of time when I was writing this book listening to 1960s, early 70s rock and roll, because it is the music of rebellion. And so I would listen to those songs again and again. I would listen to War, singing War. What is it good for? I would listen to the sense of change. A change is going to come. The pleading in the song, the rebellion in the song, and the aspiration. And those are the things that could seep into communities that didn't see themselves as part of any type of protest, but also allow them to give the questioning, the examination that a protest needs in order for it to take hold beyond the people who are in the protest.